After his birthday, he got arrested and lost his home, but something happened. David was in his room, surrounded by colorful decorations and invitations spread out on the table. Turning 18 was a milestone, and he wanted his birthday party to reflect that. He went through the guest list one last time, checking off each name. All his high school friends were there, except for one: Natalie. Natalie had been David's classmate since elementary school. They shared a special bond, marked by after-school chats and walks in the park. However, Natalie was notably reserved and avoided large crowds, which made her less present at social events. David paused for a moment, holding Natalie's invitation. He knew she would probably be uncomfortable at the party, so he decided not to send it, thinking it was in her best interest. With a sigh, he put the invitation in his drawer. In the living room, David's parents were also busy with preparations. His mum, Melanie, was arranging snacks and decorating the house with balloons and lights. His dad, Cameron, was checking the sound system, making sure the music would play without a hitch during the party. "David, you invited all your friends, right?" Melanie asked, as she arranged a flower centerpiece on the main table. "Yeah, Mum, all of them," David replied, avoiding her gaze because he knew he had left Natalie out. "Great, this is going to be a big celebration," Cameron exclaimed with a smile, "a perfect start to your adult life." David smiled back, but his heart was a bit heavy from the decision not to invite Natalie. He wondered if he had made the right choice, but the excitement of the party soon distracted him from these thoughts. Preparations continued, and soon the house was ready to welcome the guests. David looked around, pleased with how everything turned out, but a part of him still missed Natalie's presence. David's house was buzzing with laughter and loud music. Friends from different social circles mingled, danced, and chatted excitedly. David, the host, moved among the groups, greeting, laughing, and making sure everyone was having a good time. The room was decorated with balloons and lights, creating a festive atmosphere that mirrored David's youthful spirit. As the night progressed, David noticed the presence of each friend, but Natalie's absence still weighed on his mind. He tried to convince himself that he had made the right choice by not inviting her, given her discomfort with large gatherings. Around 10 o'clock, when the party was at its peak, a timid figure appeared at the door. It was Natalie, hesitant, looking into the crowded room. Dressed simply yet elegantly, she took a deep breath before stepping inside. Her arrival did not go unnoticed by David, who immediately approached her. "Natalie, I didn't expect to see you here," David said, surprised and a bit guilty. "I thought a lot about it," Natalie began, her soft voice nearly lost in the buzz. "I wanted to come, to see what it's like, but also to tell you something important." David led Natalie to a quieter corner of the garden, where they could talk more calmly. He offered her a glass of juice, noticing her hands trembled slightly. "Natalie, if you feel uncomfortable, we can go somewhere even quieter," he suggested, concerned. "Thank you, David. That's very kind of you. I just wanted to tell you that I have autism. That's why sometimes crowded and noisy places make me feel very anxious," she explained, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time that evening. David listened attentively, his heart tightened by her revelation. He had always known Natalie was different, but now he understood the nature of her struggle better. "Natalie, I'm sorry for not inviting you initially. I thought I was helping, but I realize now that I should have given you the choice," he admitted, feeling embarrassed. "And I appreciate that, David, and thank you for letting me explain. It's not easy for me, but I'm trying to face these situations more," Natalie said with a shy smile. They spent the rest of the night in the garden, talking about everything and nothing, reconnecting. David promised himself he would make future celebrations more inclusive, thinking not only of Natalie, but of everyone who might feel on the sidelines in similar situations. The party continued inside the house, but for David and Natalie, the real celebration was there, in that honest dialogue under the stars. The day after the party, David woke up with the house still in disarray. Cups scattered, decorations undone, and leftovers everywhere. As he began to clean up the space, his mind was occupied, not with the mess, but with the conversation he had with Natalie the night before. The revelation of her autism and her sincerity had left a deep impression on him. As the hours passed while cleaning up, David thought about the invisible barriers that people like Natalie faced every day. He felt a growing desire to do something meaningful, something beyond just organizing parties and gathering friends. Noticing the amount of food left over, David had an idea. Instead of letting it all go to waste, he decided to distribute the leftovers to the city's homeless population. His mother, Melanie, seeing him pack up the food, asked about his plans. "I'm going to give this to people who really need it, Mum. There's a lot of food here we can share," explained David, his tone revealing a new maturity. Melanie smiled, proud of her son's initiative. "Do you need help carrying all this?" David accepted the offer, and together they loaded the car with the leftovers. They drove to the city center, where David knew many homeless people gathered, especially at night. Upon arriving, David was greeted with smiles and thanks. He personally handed out the meals, feeling a satisfaction he had never experienced at his parties. Each thank you he received, each look of relief, strengthened his resolve to contribute more to society. However, not all encounters were positive. At one point, a man approached David, his face marked by the hardships of life on the streets. The man appeared agitated, and when David extended a meal, he brusquely refused it. "I don't need your pity," the man exclaimed, his voice carrying a mix of anger and despair. David, surprised by the reaction, tried to engage in dialogue. "It's not pity. I just want to help. There's enough food for everyone." The man stared at David for a moment, then his expression softened. "Sorry, young man. It's not easy to accept help when you feel forgotten by the world." This interaction made David reflect even more on the complexities of inequality and human dignity. He promised himself that he would continue to help, but with a new awareness of the importance of respecting everyone's autonomy and emotions, regardless of their circumstances. Returning home that night, David felt different. He had started the day as the guy who organized parties and ended it as someone who saw more clearly the challenges and beauties of the human condition. David's life took an unexpected turn the morning after his food distribution. He was in his room, reflecting on the events of the previous night, when he heard loud voices and a commotion coming from downstairs. Rushing down the stairs, David found his house swarmed by police officers. "David Montero, where are your parents?" one of the officers asked authoritatively as he entered the room. Confused and frightened, David stammered, "They're in their bedroom. What's happening?" The officers wasted no time and headed to his parents' bedroom, while David followed, trying to understand the situation. Minutes later, his parents, Cameron and Melanie, were escorted out of their room, handcuffed. "Mr. and Mrs. Montero, you are being arrested for involvement in illegal activities, including money laundering and fraud," declared one of the officers as he read them their rights. David watched, paralyzed, as his parents were taken out of the house. The reality of the situation only began to sink in when one of the officers approached him. "You also need to come with us for questioning," the officer told David. At the police station, David's initial shock turned into a mix of fear and confusion. During the interrogation, it became clear that although David was not directly involved in his parents' criminal activities, the life he knew was about to change drastically. "Your parents have confessed to their crimes, David. They were trying to protect you, but the magnitude of their actions is too great," explained the detective in charge of the case. Released due to lack of evidence against him, David left the station to face the harsh reality. His friends and acquaintances were already aware of the scandal. The community he thought he knew began to distance themselves, murmuring about the fraudster's son whenever he passed by. With the house seized and his parents awaiting trial, David suddenly found himself helpless and isolated. He tried reaching out to some of his closest friends for support, but the responses were evasive or outright negative. "David, I'm sorry, but my mom said I can't hang out with you right now," one of them texted, a sentiment that echoed the general feeling. That night, David felt the full weight of his new reality. He was alone, without financial or emotional support, a condition he never imagined he would face. The young man who once was the center of attention at parties now faced the judgment and rejection of those around him. After his parents' arrest and the loss of his family home, David found himself in a state of absolute despair. He spent the first few days wandering the city streets, carrying only a backpack with some clothes and personal items. Loneliness and uncertainty weighed on him as he tried to devise some plan for the future. Initially, David attempted to seek support from friends he thought he could trust. He visited several homes, knocking on doors in the hope of finding some comfort or at least a temporary place to stay. However, the responses were mostly cold and distant. "David, I really feel sorry for everything that's happening, but my parents don't want me to get involved," said one friend, avoiding eye contact. Another simply closed the door, stating it was a bad time for visitors. Disheartened, David realized that the friendships he thought were solid were in fact fragile and conditional. With few options left, he decided to go to Natalie's house. Although they were not the closest of friends, she had always demonstrated an understanding and kindness that now seemed to be his last hope. Upon arriving at Natalie's house, David was greeted by her with a look of concern. "David, what happened? Are you okay?" she asked, noticing the backpack and his weary state. David explained his situation, and after a quick discussion with her parents, Natalie offered him a couch to sleep on for a few days. "You can stay here until you find something more permanent," she said, offering him a comforting smile. David's stay at Natalie's house was brief but meaningful. During the days he spent there, he reflected deeply on his life and the twists it had taken. Natalie and her family were kind and supportive, providing him not only shelter but also moments of conversation and comfort. However, the situation became complicated when Natalie's father, who had initially hesitated to accept David into their home, began to feel uncomfortable with the young man's prolonged presence. "Natalie, I understand you want to help, but we can't offer more than this. He needs to find his own way," he said firmly one night. Confronted with the reality that he could no longer stay, David thanked Natalie's family for the temporary help and prepared to leave. With a heavy heart, he found himself once again without a destination, facing the prospect of living on the streets. The following morning, with his backpack on his shoulders and an uncertain future ahead, David bid Natalie farewell with a hug. "Thank you for everything, Natalie. You and your family did more for me than I could ever ask." With that goodbye, David left Natalie's house, walking towards an unknown destination, unsure of where he would find refuge that night. With Natalie's farewell still echoing in his thoughts, David found himself alone on the city streets. The harsh reality of not having a home to return to weighed on his shoulders as he wandered the sidewalks. He knew that from that moment on, each day would be a struggle for survival. In the first few days, David tried to maintain hope. He sought out temporary shelters, places that offered some relief for those in his situation. It was in one of these lines for hot soup that he met Paige, an older woman who had been living on the streets for several years. "You're new around here, aren't you?" Paige asked with a discerning look. You need to learn fast if you want to survive. Paige took David under her wing, teaching him the unwritten rules of the streets. She showed him where it was safe to sleep, how to avoid trouble with the police and other homeless people, and where to find food. Under Paige's tutelage, David began to understand the harsh reality of life without a roof. During the day, David tried to keep busy. He collected cans and other recyclables to sell, a task that was humiliating at first, but became a necessity for survival. At night, he joined Paige and other homeless individuals around an improvised bonfire, sharing stories and the little warmth the fire offered. Weeks turned into months, and life on the streets shaped David in ways he had never imagined. He witnessed generosity in small gestures, like when a stranger gave him a coat on a particularly cold night, and cruelty in moments of dispute over a piece of bread. Through all this, David kept one thing clear in his mind. He would not allow this phase of his life to define who he was. Inspired by the stories of overcoming adversity he heard around the bonfire, he began to dream of a future where he could use his experience to help others. One day, while scavenging near a train station, David found a discarded book. It was a novel about a young man who overcame great adversities to become a leader. The book, though worn and slightly torn, became a treasure to David, inspiring him to believe that even in the worst circumstances, there was still hope. These years on the streets hardened David, but they also opened his eyes to the complexity of the world around him. He learned about human resilience, the depth of despair, and most importantly, the capacity to start anew. 3 years had passed since David began living on the streets. He was no longer the young man who once celebrated his birthday in a house full of friends and family. Life on the streets had changed David, teaching him hard lessons about reality and showing him a new perspective on the world. On a grey autumn afternoon, while walking through the park where he often spent his afternoons reading and reflecting, David saw a familiar figure in the distance. It was Natalie, sitting on a bench, engrossed in a book. Hesitant at first, David approached. His heart pounded, not just from the reunion, but from the uncertainty of how he would be received. "Natalie," he called softly. Looking up, Natalie took a moment to recognize the man before her. The David she knew had been replaced by someone marked by outdoor living. But his eyes, those were unmistakable. "David, is that really you?" she exclaimed, a mix of surprise and concern in her voice. "What happened to you?" David shared his journey since the last time they saw each other, the hardships, the lessons learned, and the life he now led. Natalie listened with a heavy heart, her sadness for her friend evident in her eyes. "I'm so sorry for everything you've been through, David, but you don't have to live like this. Come, I want to introduce you to someone who can help," she said, standing up. She led him to a small cafe near the park, where a middle-aged man, blind in one eye, sat enjoying a cup of coffee. He turned to them with a warm smile. "David, this is Parker. He's a family friend and has been doing incredible work helping people in tough situations," Natalie explained. Parker extended his hand, which David shook, feeling a wave of hope. "Natalie has told me a lot about you over the years. I run an organization that offers employment and lodging for those who are ready to start over." "I think we can help each other," said Parker. The invitation was a ray of light in the darkness that had become David's life. With gratitude and a new sense of purpose, he accepted Parker's offer. In the days that followed, David moved into a small apartment provided by Parker's organization and began working on various projects. Working with Parker and his team reignited a flame in David. He dedicated himself to learning everything he could about social work and project management, determined to make a difference in the lives of others, as Parker and Natalie had done in his. David began his new life with renewed vigor. Working at Parker's organization, he found a purpose previously unknown to him. Every day he interacted with people facing adversities similar to those he had overcome. His own experience on the streets gave him a unique perspective and empathy that made him exceptionally suited for the job. Alongside his professional development, David's relationship with Natalie also began to flourish in a new way. They spent more and more time together, not just as friends, but as souls who shared an understanding of life's hardships and beauties. Inspired by David's transformation and resilience, Natalie found in him not just a friend, but a source of strength and inspiration. On a warm spring afternoon, as they walked through the same park where they had reunited, David took Natalie's hand and stopped in front of a garden bench where they had often talked. "Natalie," David began, looking into her eyes. "These past few years have been the most challenging, but also the most transformative of my life, and on many of my darkest days, it was the memory of your kindness and friendship that gave me hope. I've fallen in love with you, not just for your compassion, but for your incredible strength and courage." Natalie, surprised and moved, squeezed David's hand. "David, I've also felt something changing between us. Your strength and determination are inspirations to me. Being by your side is something I cherish immensely." With these words, they decided to take a step beyond friendship, exploring the new feelings that arose between them. In the following months, their relationship deepened even further. They shared not only love, but a commitment to social causes and helping others. While David worked at the organization, Natalie began to get involved in educational projects for children with special needs, a passion she discovered through her own experience with autism. Together, they became a force in their community, working to create a more inclusive and compassionate environment. This new phase of David's life also brought reconciliation with his parents, who, after being released on parole, sought to repair the damage caused by their past mistakes. David, influenced positively by Natalie, found room in his heart to forgive them, facilitating encounters that, although initially tense, gradually became warmer. After years of rebuilding and personal growth, David and Natalie decided to seal their love and commitment through marriage. The preparations for the celebration reflected their values: simplicity, inclusion, and the valuing of every individual. They chose an outdoor venue, a park where they had spent many significant moments, planning a ceremony that would also benefit the local community. While planning their wedding, both faced the challenge of involving their families, which had been sources of tension in the past. David's parents, still carrying the stigma of their financial crimes, were eager to show they had changed. They wanted to support David, but also felt the need to redeem themselves in the eyes of Natalie and her family. On the other hand, Natalie's parents, initially hesitant about her relationship with David due to his tumultuous past, needed time to fully accept the union. David's constant presence and positive influence, however, gradually convinced them of his character and integrity. "Natalie, your parents always wanted the best for you, and I know they're still concerned about the complications my life brought," David said one evening while discussing wedding details. "They see how you've changed, David. They see the work we do together. That has helped a lot," Natalie replied, holding his hand. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a time of dialogue and understanding. David and Natalie organized several dinners with their families, promoting open conversations about their pasts, their learnings, and their future plans. These meetings, although sometimes tense, were crucial for building a bridge between the families. Finally, the wedding day arrived. The park was decorated simply yet elegantly, with wildflowers and ribbons that gently swayed in the wind. Guests, a mix of old and new friends, community members and family, gathered under the clear sky. The ceremony was deeply personal, with David and Natalie sharing vows that resonated with their joint and individual journeys. David thanked Natalie for her strength and support, while Natalie praised David for his resilience and compassionate heart. After they exchanged rings, the applause from the attendees sealed the moment. The families, now united by the marriage of David and Natalie, felt a renewed sense of hope and acceptance. David's parents, visibly moved, embraced the couple, grateful for the chance to start anew. The rest of the day was a celebration of love, friendship, and community. The wedding not only united David and Natalie, but also symbolized reconciliation and a new beginning for everyone involved. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.